I'm going to start this video off with a story. It was a crisp fall morning and I was jogging back home at the end of a lovely little run. I turned the corner onto my street, looked down at my house, and saw dark smoke billowing from the far side. My stomach flipped over as I took in the scene. My house is on fucking fire. I sprinted towards the wreckage as my mind reeled with every possibility of how this could have happened. I definitely turned the stove off last night, right? Could I have left my computer on and caused an electrical fire? But then, the smoke cloud started moving, and a truck appeared from around the bend in the road. That's when I realized my house was never on fire. My dumbass neighbor was just stalled next to it. His truck was emitting the smoke. I stopped in my tracks, stunned, as the culprit drove by. And when he passed, I caught a glimpse of his license plate. A vanity plate with the American flag plastered on it, and one word, smog, written on it. I've encountered some pretty disgusting vehicles throughout my life, and my initial reaction is always the same. How the hell did they pass emissions? See, I come from the suburbs outside of DC, and out there, emissions testing is mandatory. So when I saw our good pal Smog spewing out his noxious gases, I assumed he'd found some way to evade the emissions testing. Maybe he discovered some legal loophole that exempted his diesel demon from testing. Obviously, I was giving him too much credit. He didn't find some clever workaround. He just never had to get his emissions checked because nobody in Flagstaff does. It's not mandatory. In fact, it's not just not mandatory, it's actually impossible to get your emissions tested here. The Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, or ADEQ for short, is the governing body for all emissions testing laws in the state. And according to their website, the only two areas that have emissions testing in Arizona are Phoenix and Tucson. If you live anywhere else in the state, you can spew out whatever toxic trash you want without a care in the world. Now, it's 2025. I'm sure everyone here knows the dangers of breathing polluted air. But if you don't, good news. ADEQ has an entire section on the necessities of emissions testing. According to their sister site, MyAZCar, ozone and particulate matter pollution exacerbates breathing-related illnesses such as bronchitis, emphysema, asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, and other respiratory or pulmonary issues. And then it links to a plethora of research on the subject. I completely agree with everything written here and appreciate their efforts to inform the public on this issue, but you can't deny the irony of seeing the phrase, "For the millions of Arizonans who choose to own and operate motor vehicles, each plays an important role in maintaining and improving Arizona's air quality," next to this map. I'm sorry, but do we actually play an important role here? Because unless you live in one of these two tiny bubbles, it doesn't seem like you do. The obvious counter argument to all of this is that, oh, well, the land doesn't spew car emissions, the people do. Sure, the map looks bad, but according to population data, roughly 6.1 million people, or just over 80% of the state's population, lives in a zone with mandatory emissions testing. So what's the big deal if a few people don't have to get tested? And then it dawns on you that a few people in this context is over 1 million people. I told you earlier about good old Smog and his noxious fumes. Imagine multiplying him by 1 million. And now you start to realize why this is still a major issue. Even a town like Flagstaff, with its modest population of 76,000, plays a major role in the degradation of our air quality. I've heard people say that because our air is so clean and pure, we don't need rigorous emissions testing. It's not like we can make the air any cleaner here, right? Wrong. Whether you live in the smoggy slums of New Delhi or the pristine, untouched middle of nowhere, your car still emits fumes. And someone, somewhere, is still breathing in those fumes. A disturbing article from the Washington Post states that the Environmental Protection Agency estimates that on certain days, nearly 25% of the particulate matter in the sky above Los Angeles can be traced back to China. Even if you don't feel the effects of your pollution, somebody, somewhere, does. And again, exposure to car emissions can cause a multitude of respiratory illnesses, some of which can be fatal. An article on COPD from the Cleveland Clinic states that COPD gets progressively worse over time, but it's not always a terminal illness. How comforting. Over time, usually years or even decades, many people with COPD won't be able to breathe on their own. I'll let that one soak in for a minute. Somebody, somewhere, is drawing their final breath because of us. A family is grieving because of us. I don't want to be responsible for that, and I sure as hell hope you don't either. So how do we fix this? Well, contrary to everything I've just said, I don't think it makes sense to require every Arizona resident to get tested. There are some people who live out in the middle of nowhere who would have to drive hours just to get to their nearest testing site, and that doesn't seem reasonable. However, if we can expand mandatory testing just to the cities of Flagstaff, Yuma, Lake Havasu, and Prescott, that's a combined 300,000 people whose vehicles won't make your lungs look like those of a 17th century coal miner. But emissions testing seems to be regulated at the state level, not the city level, so we need to go back to our friends at ADEC. They have a complaint form which seems to be meant primarily for law violations instead of law creations, but I feel like if enough people spam the page with demands for more widespread testing, it could get the message across. And if that doesn't work, they have a physical location down in Phoenix. So, who's down to hop on the Groom shuttle bus with me and take a trip down to the ADAC headquarters, huh? They can't exactly ignore our complaints if we block them from going to work. I mean, they could have us pepper sprayed, but, they might not.